Hi kids! Thanks for joining me for another one of our Bible lessons. This week we're talking about a man named Joshua from our Spark Bible. In fact, before we talk about Joshua, let's invite God, our Creator, to be here today, Jesus, and I've lit a candle for the Holy Spirit to be present as we talk about the importance of this story in our Bible. But before we talk about Joshua, let's go backwards just a little bit. Before Joshua was the leader of God's people, there was a man named Moses. You might remember Moses, who climbed up on top of that mountain, and he was given the 10 Commandments. He shared them with everyone, and then God's people followed those commandments. Now Moses lived to be 120 years old. After he died, God appointed Joshua to be the leader of God's people. Joshua led the Israelites to the Promised Land. You'll see a video in which they talk about this story, and you'll see some incredible things. You'll see God's faithfulness to Joshua and God's people. And they were told to do some really interesting things, because once they got to the Promised Land, they found the city of Jericho was surrounded by this giant wall. Our story is called The Battle at Jericho. You'll find out the instructions that Joshua gave to God's people and what they had to do in order to bring down that wall. Take a look and listen and enjoy the story about God's people led by Joshua. And if you have time this week, print out our online lesson. It has a recap of our story. It also has some things to talk about with your family and an ending prayer. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to seeing you again next week. In the meantime, I want you to have a very blessed week ahead. Bye-bye.
God's story, Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. So part of God's story is about a guy named Joshua, and it goes like this. 40 years after God led his family out of Egypt and through the desert, he chose Joshua to lead them to an amazing home he had promised them called Canaan. Now, Canaan wasn't their home yet. Not really. See, people lived there already, in a big city called Jericho. They had heard how God parted the Red Sea and rained down food from heaven for his family. They had heard how God had led his family with a cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. And they realized that if God wanted his family to move into Canaan, he would do something remarkable to get them there. So they were ready for an epic fight. In the past, that had really scared God's family. But here's the thing. God knew Jericho looked scary for his family. So when it was time to go, he reminded Joshua that he was in control. God said, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Joshua might have felt afraid, but he chose to be strong and courageous. Have you ever done something you know is right, even though you were scared? Anyway, for a while, God's family camped out, waiting to go in, wondering how to get through Jericho's walls. Then one night, Joshua looked up and saw a man standing in front of him. He was holding a sword and looked ready for battle, but Joshua didn't recognize him. He asked, "Are you on our side or our enemy's side?" The man said, "Neither. I'm on the Lord's side." At that moment, Joshua realized that it was God appearing as a soldier. He fell on his face and worshiped him. God was definitely with them and would lead the Israelites into Jericho. Well, after that, God told Joshua how to get through Jericho's walls. Here's what he told Joshua to do. March around the city once every day for 6 days. Have 7 priests get trumpets made out of ram's horns and carry them. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times. The priests should blow the trumpets during the march. When they blow a long blast, all the men should shout. Then the walls will fall. Joshua might have wondered how walking and yelling would make walls fall, but he didn't question God. He trusted God, so he obeyed. And guess what? At the last trumpet blast, the walls fell, just like God said they would. God promised not to leave his family, and he didn't. He helped them get through an impossible wall and move into their new and beautiful home. And through Joshua, God would continue to help his family. In fact, Joshua finally became so sure of God's power that he was able to help others to be strong and courageous, just like God had helped him. And that's the story of Joshua. But you want to know the best part? God appeared as a man to show Joshua that he would fight for his family and bring them safely to their new home. Joshua had nothing to fear. And later, Jesus came to earth as a man to fight for us by taking our punishment for sin so that one day we can live with him in a perfect new home, which means we have nothing to fear. Like Joshua, we can be strong and courageous.